Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast today is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, HKU SCF's FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, and HKU edX's Professional Certificate in FinTech, with support from the university's Faculty of Law. Almost 2 years ago, harkening back to our first episode of Regulatory Ramblings, our inaugural guest, Bill Miker, once remarked to me that there are more people with anti-money laundering experience than knowledge of actual money laundering. Today's topic is how to defeat money laundering with rational thinking and not compliance red flags. Our guest today is Dr. Mariola Marzouk, an AML professional with extensive experience in regulatory software and consulting across both the public and private sectors. Her career spans software and consulting firms, working with banks globally on the best use for technology to address regulatory compliance demands. Mariola has held strategic product management positions at world-famous companies such as the noted defense contractor BAE, Applied Intelligence, Ernst & Young, Nice Actimize, and Napier AI. Specializing in financial crime prevention, she's demonstrated expertise in detecting money laundering schemes using advanced technologies. Her focus has extended to trade-based money laundering, and her research in this area has garnered a fair deal of recognition within the industry. Specifically, she recently completed postgraduate research on the use of technologies to help banks mitigate trade-based money laundering risks. Last year, after completing her doctorate in criminal justice with a focus on TBML, she co-founded Vortex Risk Ltd. And it should be noted that her colleague, Richard Gilmore, was himself a guest on this program a year ago with his co-author Tristan Hicks to discuss their book, The War on Dirty Money, a book I strongly encourage you all to get. Vortex Risk is dedicated to empowering individuals and organizations worldwide by providing insights into money laundering practices. The firm takes a unique approach of offering perspectives akin to rational thinking criminals who operate discreetly to evade regulatory suspicion. Mariola's pilot study on Brexit's impact on TBML was published in the Journal of Money Laundering Controls, featured on GTR News, and cited by the Institute of Export and International Trade UK. A link to her doctoral dissertation entitled The Role of Compliance Technologies in Helping UK Banks Mitigate Trade-Based Money Laundering According to the Regulatory Risk-Based Approach shall be posted to this site. And with that, Mariola, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on your podcast.
Much obliged. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from originally, and what brought you to the field of AML, financial crime consulting?
Of course. So I was actually raised in Poland by the Ukrainian border, which is one of the most impoverished areas of Poland. After the communism, Poland was not very economically well. I've always aspired to learn about economics and accounting and finance. So I've decided to move to the United States, where I completed my bachelor's degree in finance and returned to Europe. I moved actually to the United Kingdom, and I've been here for 18 years, where I continued my education in the field by doing masters in forensic accounting from the University of Portsmouth. And during the study program, I became very interested in money laundering aspect of investigating corporate wrongdoings. Was lucky enough to become part of British Aerospace and Engineering Applied Intelligence Division, that is typically referred to as BAE Systems Applied Intelligence. The company purchased two flagship products in a space of fraud prevention and money laundering prevention called Norcom Technologies and NetReveal. And I originally started within their corporate strategy division function, looking at all sorts of industry problems in detecting economic crimes such as fraud and money laundering, and also cybercrime, and became quite interested in niche aspects of the market problem, meaning trade-based money laundering. And the reason behind that was because everyone was quoting that trade-based money laundering was the most pervasive and the biggest money laundering method out there. Yet there weren't many solutions developed at that time, and that was about 10, 15 years ago. Equally, there wasn't much spent on mitigating that particular crime, and it was considered to be just a typology that was too difficult to solve. And me being a very rebellious person, I decided that in this case, this is a D typology for me to focus on. I love when someone says something is too difficult or impossible. That just means that nobody has done it before, and it catches my interest. So I embarked on the journey. I decided to research the subject first on my own. Was struggling actually to find experienced professional within trade-based money laundering field to teach me about the problem. So I've done a lot of research myself and eventually concluded that it would be best if I complete that study under the umbrella university, where I have access to very notable academics and economic crime professionals, people who wrote books on the subject and had been around debating and critiquing existing approaches for many years. And they would be able simply to guide me in the best process of researching in the most ethical way, trustworthy way, where everyone can rely on the data that is going to come out of my research. So University of Portsmouth proved to be a very great university to accomplish that means, because they had a nice program for people who were full-time working and equally wanted to do a PhD. So I've done professional doctorates, and that is it's combining academic studies with your professional practice. So at the end of your research, the objective of your research is to create impact, practical impact on the industry. And that practical impact became Vortex Risk that I've co-founded with Dr. Nicholas Gilmore, the one who wrote the book The War on Dirty Money with Tristan Hicks. So that's my kind of career in a nutshell of how I ended up in, I suppose, regulatory compliance or anti-money laundering space.
It's very international background, and given your own, as you put it, rebelliousness, was that what drew you further into this line of work? I mean, is that what attracted you? For some people, it's some people it's the thrill of it. It's certainly interest in this field has surged post 9/11. I mean, my own story is I grew interested in this because I lost friends on 9/11, and so that, rather than being interested in international law and IP, I shifted my own research and academic interests, and to some degree professionally too, because really right from the start, as a journalist, when I started my career in October of 2006, that's what I focused on. Did your rebelliousness was that part of the drive to delve into something that, as you put it, that people had said that no one has done this before, it's unsolvable, and then you thought you'd take your crack at this puzzle?
In a nutshell, yes. I do remember the time of 9/11, as you were speaking, kind of you transporting me back to that moment. I was very young at that time. Actually, I think it was my first year at community college near Chicago. I remember that I arrived to a classroom and everyone was sitting in silence and watching airplanes obviously hit the Twin Towers. And I thought we were watching a movie.
Okay.
And I asked my friend, why are we watching a movie? And he said, this is not a movie. This is what happened. I was in absolute shock. I didn't at that point had any understanding of how money influences actions like that. And I was studying at that time finance at Morin Valley. When I arrived to the United Kingdom and started working in British aerospace and engineering, this is when I realized how actions of terrorism are connected to the money flow, and equally how injustice in this world is connected to the money flow, how robbery and wrongdoing is connected to the money flow. And I felt this strong sense of purpose-driven work that I wanted to bring correction or corrective action to the system. So in essence, I've realized that in order for the wrongdoings to be corrected, for people to feel safer, and for a more inclusive and just societies, there needs to be a restorative justice in place. And that restorative justice would be if we trigger or focus on taking money away from those who benefit from such evil ideas and their ideologies and actions that follow. And I focused on money laundering, therefore, because it was apparent to me that if I wanted to do any good into this world, and with all the knowledge that I have acquired, to where it would be my worth would be of greatest value to the world. My work would be of greatest value to the world. And the fact that actually people were telling me it's impossible to solve for the most pervasive money laundering method in the world, which is trade-based money laundering, I thought, well, I cannot accept that. I cannot accept that it is as an excuse to say, well, I am not going to try because many people before me perhaps attempted to solve for the problem and it failed, and I am nowhere near my knowledge or experience to even consider tackling trade-based money laundering. But the fact that nobody was, and that it was such an important problem to solve, made me feel that perhaps I can have a go at that. And there's no damage that I can do. I can only improve at least the knowledge that others can use to advance thinking in this field. So I am very much driven by the purpose of restorative justice into this world through tackling the money that the criminals continue to enjoy, because they do. Despite all the effort we have done, they continue to enjoy the money.
And as someone coming from Eastern Europe, and the corruption you no doubt saw during the communist era, and certainly when it ended, and then the madcap rush to get rich, and how some people really did get rich, turning state assets into private assets when communism ended, and all of that. I mean, in a very palpable way, you I think know more about that than most people. No, not to over dramatize, but having the thing about that, people often talk about this as though it's a victimless crime. When I think back to that time, shortly after 9/11, it was really only then the average person started to get some sense of what money laundering was all about, what terrorist financing was all about, some semblance of what compliance, why compliance mattered. Based on all you know and how long you've been in this field, what are there any misconceptions about money laundering or anti-money laundering that you'd like to dispel up front?
Yes, as a matter of fact, this is a very interesting topic that I am very keen to expand on. During my studies, which obviously took a lengthy period of time, a lot of sacrifices and devotion to accomplish, putting a research together, and the amount of reading and talking to professionals made me realize that we know nothing about how money is laundered. The red flags or the regulatory stipulations are as if they are a front window dressing show that have very little impact to disrupting the flow of dirty money, the flow of money that obviously funds activities like terrorism attacks, like injustice and poverty. They are ineffective because if you think like a criminal, the first thing you would do if you really want to, if you want to launder money after you've committed some criminal activity, that obviously is a risky thing to do, is to lose that money. So I would definitely not do anything that would trigger the red flags. It's just very rational thinking. If you want to avoid being detected for your wrongdoing, you will find out, you will research, you will understand what sort of measures the legitimate world has in place in order to catch you on your wrongdoings. So it made no sense, absolutely, that criminals would be laundering money the way that the FFTF tells us, the way that the regulatory guidelines publish, when, by the way, all of these are actually in public domain. It doesn't take much to research and understand what financial institutions, for example, are looking for.
We should quickly add for the FATF is the Financial Action Task Force, the Paris-based body that sets the norms for money laundering and counter-terrorist financing, KYC, and sanctions worldwide. And they're noted for their 40-plus recommendations, which I believe no country or very few countries in the world follow completely or score perfectly on.
Yes. Thank you for adding that. I will bear in mind not to use acronyms. So yes, and I was totally puzzled. Why would we be following those red flags when rationally thinking as a criminal, I would be avoiding them? And then if you look at the progress we have made in detecting money laundering, well, actually, we have been quoting the numbers of money laundering at 2.3 trillion, 3 trillion, which, by the way, kind of refers to a tip of the iceberg figure, which is typically 10%. So now international trade is about 31 trillion. If you take 10% of that, then we arrive to this money laundering problem. Nobody actually knows how exactly these numbers were put together, but we are quoting them. We are together as a society accepting that money laundering is a very big problem, and it was a big problem 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It is a problem today, and it's in the same scale. So following those red flags and guidelines clearly have done nothing to disrupt the dirty money. And further, if you dig deeper into that, we constantly hear about false positives that technology solutions alert to. meaning these are the alerts that have been highlighted that highlighted a customer or their activity, saying that there's something suspicious happening on their accounts or in the way they are set up. And whenever those false positives are being, or those alerts are being reviewed, the conclusions are that they were created on legitimate customers, people who actually have done nothing wrong, and they triggered those alerts. So again, the guidelines and the red flags tend to trigger an activity of legitimate customers. So we are not finding money launderers. The legitimate customers are getting triggered. So how can we possibly justify effectiveness of this approach? We can't. And then you have a lot of suspicious activity reports being filed by financial institutions who naturally want to defend themselves from possible regulatory fines, overloading law enforcement with information that is on mostly legitimate customers, this way diluting intelligence that they need to use in order to focus their attention on the most pressing problems or most pressing cases. And because of all of this, or how those factors interact with each other, I couldn't remain in the anti-money laundering industry, as we call it, and I started referring to it simply as regulatory compliance industry, and realized that we know nothing about money laundering. There is no such a thing as anti-money laundering industry. It is all about complying with regulatory stipulations, and irrespective if we do find crime or not, it is only about complying with regulations. And criminals simply walk free when legitimate customers end up paying for the regime not functioning.
Interesting you should say that we know very little about money laundering itself. I mean, something that came up during my conversation with your colleague, Dr. Gilmore, was that at its base, we know money laundering is merely the transmission of value, and that can take many forms. It can take multiple routes. Trade-based money laundering is seeing a bit of a renaissance now. It's quite old, actually. It's seeing a renaissance now because they've tightened up in the financial sector. It was done in an earlier age when, say, Hong Kong was a up-and-coming trading port, when people were sending exports to the West and they wanted to get around intellectual property laws, and they wanted to minimize their trade tariff bill. I can cite the example of people in the Indian business community, for example, that were selling counterfeit video games to the U.S., and on the manifest, they would just write games. The more details you would add, the more it would compel the customs people to open up a consignment and see what was inside. So one, they would write games. Two, they would obviously cite a lower value in terms of what was being sent, so as to lower their trade tariff. This was in the era of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, before the World Trade Organization. So they were lowering their tariff bill, and they're also skirting intellectual property rules. So really, trade-based money laundering is not new. We know that money laundering is the transmission of value. But too much of the compliance world comes down to checklists and rote memorization and rigid protocols and procedures. That resonated with me, especially when I read your profile on LinkedIn, where as your aim, mission statement of your philosophy, you say is to defeat money laundering with rational thinking and not compliance red flags. Now, rational thinking, I'm thinking, okay, you're referring to the unseen factors. Compliance red flags, that's more obvious. Could you? To me, it's about you've got to tackle both the seen and the unseen. I'd like to hear from you in your own words. What do you mean by defeating money laundering with rational thinking and not compliance red flags?
Of course. So you've referred to trade-based money laundering, and the way you've described it actually is the way majority of the people understand trade-based money laundering, and that is very much linked to trade finance activity or trade finance products, letters of credit, documentary collections, and guarantees. However, this is not how trade-based money laundering happens. The reason why trade-based money laundering is very strongly associated with trade finance products is because of the definition that Financial Action Task Force has put together in regards to what trade-based money laundering is. It very much speaks about transactions that are conducted cross-border, international transactions. And that is not always the case. I mean, if I purchase an item from my domestic supplier and I don't use trade finance products, but I simply pay this person either by cash or I pay them by a wire transfer, have I not conducted trade?
Of course.
Yes, I have.
So it can be domestic as well. Yeah, but we'll take
exactly.
And the other thing I would add also is that, and people say, when law firms produce briefings, alerts, primers on trade-based money laundering, so many of them don't talk about warehouses in this equation, which they say, well, that's not part of our focus, that's not part of our remit. That's a cop-out in my view. And many of them don't talk about verification of shipping destinations, as in, did vessel X make it to its designated port to begin with? That seems, it would seem to me that should be a part of trade-based money laundering analysis, but it's not. But I'm sorry I interrupted. Please go ahead.
Oh no, you have not interrupted at all. Yes, there are actually so various different financial institutions, depending on their size and the amount of money they make from trade finance products, and obviously tracking the movement of goods from one place to another. Depending on obviously the available resources and the money they have, some of them apply technologies to help them accomplish this. However, when you speak to those professionals and ask them about how do they experience trade-based money laundering, again, the biggest money laundering method in the world, they do not talk about trade finance products. They are actually saying that is, yes, there are instances of suspicious activities happening there. Most of the time, this would be very strongly associated with tax evasion or fraud, or simply currency to avoid currency restrictions. Then they point why there aren't that many money laundering observations. For example, if you, again, thinking about like a rational criminal who does not want to get caught, why would I use highly documented, manual and transparent and costly and lengthy trade finance products if I can use much simpler, non-transparent methods? Putting a trade finance documentation together in order to fulfill import and exporting controls is quite complicated, and many people who do this make mistakes. Why would I submit so much information about my activity and myself to the bank only to encourage scrutiny? Because all the financial institutions I have spoken to point strongly that every trade finance transaction is reviewed and scrutinized. Why they use this method to launder money? Why would I use over and under invoicing that I know there are technologies and there are methods to check for pricing? Of course, not every item can be checked, but they can compare, for example, to trades that happen historically. So there are methods that banks can apply to satisfy themselves about whether the fair pricing has been applied to a degree. But why would I use over and under invoicing? Why would I manipulate any data if I don't have to do that? If I can put accurate pricing for goods or services, we don't even talk about services, but they are far more vulnerable to this activity. And my studies actually showed that again, because of the Financial Action Task Force definition that talks about manipulation of data, the only place you can actually observe that is if you have some documentation to go by and review the information to judge that there was a manipulation of data. But it doesn't talk about situations where, again, let's go back to the domestic trade. I did not manipulate pricing. It was fair price that I've put on it. Whether that actually shipment happened or not, well, we could have it debatable. Actually, the shipment might have happened, but it's there's no need for this. Equally, even those pricing information are difficult to compare between countries as well, because there are different methods to record price at the export and the import point. There is obviously a lot of data that could be missing in between. There is a lot of extra costs that need to be added to the price of the products. I, as a criminal, would stay away from trade finance unless I have to use it. For example, to give you an example, when I would have to use it is if I took over a business that has been using trade finance products, then I want to keep it that way. Because I don't want to raise any suspicion. Because if I all of a sudden stopped using trade finance products, then above my question, I would just keep it that way. But in the meantime, I would develop other methods of paying people that I obviously want to transact with for illicit purposes. Equally, trade-based money laundering is a barter trade as well. And if I was a criminal, I would most certainly try to stay away from the financial services sector as much as possible. But why not use barter trade? You give me a service, I give you a service in return. Pay me in services, pay me in value, pay me in some benefits. So it's, even though people talk about trade-based money laundering and the most prevalent method, and when they focus on trade-based money laundering, they forget the fact that only 20%, so we have figured 20% is only associated with trade finance, using trade finance products, and the rest is actually happening via open accounts. So if indeed this is the most prevalent money laundering method, it cannot be happening on trade finance because it's only 20%. But that's where the regulators focus, and because the regulators perceive trade-based money laundering as a trade finance problem, banks feel they are restricted from actually putting measures in place where they see and experience trade-based money laundering happening. And when we zoom out and think about trade-based money laundering from domestic and international perspective, from not considering over and under invoicing or any other manipulation of data, then we start to understand that trade-based money laundering, in this case, it is a simple matter of transfers and purchases. And if it's a simple matter of transfer and purchases, then it's nothing more than just simply money laundering. If I purchase an item from Amazon, am I not conducting trade transactions? I am paying for a product. Amazon just traded with me. So if we zoom out and really stop thinking about trade-based money laundering, TBML equals trade finance, and it's just a simple matter of transfers and purchases, then there is no other typology in this world apart from one, and that is money laundering.
As I understand it, your approach to regulatory compliance is that you favor the use of RegTech to help regulated entities meet their compliance burden. But I have to wonder, are things like data analytics and artificial intelligence really a panacea? Are they a solution to all of their problems? Because, let's take sanctions, for example. My understanding is that there's a growing body of work suggesting that AI has failed in the sanctions space, which is, broadly speaking, related to AML and CTF. So what are we to make of the use of technology? It has its uses, but it's not it's not foolproof. You can't completely rest on it blindly. What are your thoughts? As someone who supports, who advocates the use of technology, but I'm sure you're also aware of its shortcomings. What are your impressions?
Yes, I am probably one of the few people that are aware of them or are publicly critical about the regulatory compliance technologies as they are being used and advertised today.
Okay.
And that's because I have an experience in that field. I'm not saying that technologies are bad. It's just that people behind those technologies do not understand money laundering.
Or do they overpromise sometimes in terms of what?
Absolutely. That's part of the marketing strategy. When you pitch for investments, you are in a RegTech space, which is the regulatory technologies. When we have about
I'm former Thomson Reuters, so yeah, very competitive.
We have thousands of them nowadays, and when you compete for those investments, it is difficult for anyone to give you the money. You need to show that your technologies have much wider application than just making compliance cheaper and faster. You need to show that you can enter adjacent markets like fraud space, like now the new one, ESG issues, or a supply chain. You need to show that it's far more applicable, because at the end, the investors want to know whether they can maximize their investments they put into you. So their marketing starts to reflect the wishful thinking of the investors. And they compete on those buzzwords. That's what it is. And those buzzwords have increasingly, since I started my career in the regulatory technology space in 2014. That was 2014. Yes, it was a long time ago. Those buzzwords have become bolder in their claims. Now you talk about they moved away from advocating, we are regulatory technology providers, we are here to help banks mitigate money laundering associated with non-compliance with the regulations, all the way to fighting future financial crimes. Many of them call themselves financial crime fighters. They are disrupting money laundering. They are taking us to the next level. They are making apparently life impossible for criminals to launder money. Well, the claims are really big. But if the claims are so big, and if indeed that's what they do, where's the proof of the success? Where money launderers are still laundering money successfully. They are not disrupted. Again, taking putting a hat of as a criminal money launderer, I would laugh at that. Actually, this is fantastic. Keep going that way. Keep patting yourselves in the back and self-awarding yourselves great titles. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because you are not looking in the right place, because you do not understand money laundering. All you're doing is following those red flags and the regulatory stipulations, and you are applying advanced technologies like AI or social network analytics, but you are finding more or less of the same. Maybe you're finding it faster, maybe you're making it slightly cheaper, but you're finding more or less of the same, because we are not disrupting money laundering. Those figures are not going down. There's a lot of injustice in this world, a lot of wrongdoing, a lot of poverty. We are clearly not making any difference. And equally, their claims or their ways of promoting themselves and encouraging people to join the industry and to join working for them is filled with purpose-driven messaging. But the purpose is not achieved. We still have great injustice in this world. We have wars. Those wars obviously need to be paid for. We have sanctions evasion. So I am not saying technologies are bad. I'm just saying that people behind them are more motivated to make their investors happy, to show that they are on the footpath to become a unicorn, so achieve a valuation of $1 billion or over $1 billion. And they have this great messaging, but the fruit of their labor is not visible. They are like the tree that is green and big with wonderful leaves, and you approach the tree thinking there's going to be a great, fruit there, and you find there's nothing. It's barren. It just looks great, sounds great, but that's all.
In your career, you've been a product manager, you've been a corporate strategist, and while you haven't been a techie per se, certainly you developed an understanding of technological development and how and when it should be deployed to solve particular problems. That I think is, when we first spoke, you put it in terms of all tools, even technological tools, should meet certain client objectives. So could you describe to me the challenges you faced being on the business side, becoming knowledgeable about the technology issues? I mean, how steep was your learning curve?
So it is a very interesting question, and I thought about it actually, how to respond to it, because there's a lot of challenges that I faced, but obviously because we don't have the eternity to speak, I thought I will focus on the one that was probably the most painful for me. And that is when I've joined British Aerospace Engineering, sat within corporate strategy function. So I was very much exposed to the market problems and what the challenges clients were facing, how they were experiencing the problems, and all the frustrations that they would receive on the back of needing to comply with the regulations versus what they thought would be the best to mitigate money laundering. And I've realized that I didn't. So the most challenging aspect was actually learning the very technical language or technical aspects of developing the product. And I was actually surprised why I would need to have that deep knowledge. I was actually told when I wanted to move, or I was in the process of moving from being a strategic, sitting within a corporate strategy function, to being closer to the product, which is a product management function, that I was told that I would have to go back to school and learn to code, to be a techie. Because you cannot be a part of the product without being techy. And that is the core reason why those RegTech solutions actually are not successful. Because they were assuming, so at the time, those individuals were assuming that being techy or learning about details of technology and coding is complicated. Therefore, you must return to school to acquire that knowledge, versus the knowledge about money laundering, how money is laundered, is easy. I mean, we have plenty of reports and red flags and guidelines and so forth. That's easy. You can just download things from the internet and learn. And here comes the problem. It's actually the other way around. We don't know how money is laundered. If we don't know how money is laundered, how are you developing those solutions? And that's how majority of the RegTech technologies or RegTech providers function and how they came up. We have a lot of people who established those RegTech companies who are techies. Yes, they can code. Yes, they understand inside out of innovative technologies and whatnot. But do they understand the problem they want to solve? No. Is that what they care about? Looks like no. Looks like they've developed tools that then they're looking for a market problem to fit those tools to work on. It's like, you're holding a hammer in your hand and you are walking around your house and thinking, what sort of problem am I having in this house that I can use this tool on? Well, this is not how product management and developing any product solution should start. It should always start from understanding deeply the problem you are thinking of addressing, the problem you're passionate about addressing, the problem you really, really understand, you took time to understand. That's not how it all starts. It starts the other way around. And this is one of the reasons why many of those technologies are not solving for the problem. They are there. They are highly sophisticated, becoming even more sophisticated. But they are not driven by solving the problem because nobody has bothered and took time to understand it. It's just lots of hammers walking around. We're trying to figure a problem that we can use that hammer on. So we will never solve it this way. That's principles of product management. First, understand the problem. Then, identify which solutions would be most suitable to solve this problem. It might be actually that some of the elements of the problem can only be solved by human, and others could be solved by tech. But that's not how they advertise. If we even listen to their webinars or read their white papers or blogs, all we hear about is how the artificial intelligence and now ChatGPT is going to solve for money laundering. It's going to be the paracetamol. That's the pill we're going to swallow and it's all going to go away. Well, no, because you're actually targeting the wrong disease with the wrong product. You haven't understood what the problem is. So you can't solve it, no matter what tool you have.
Certainly, when your only tool is a hammer, pretty soon every problem starts to look like a nail, I think is the saying. And a mutual friend of ours, Robin Lee, who's currently at Hawk AI, remarked to me some years ago, this was in the wee hours of the morning, we were at a diner in Wan Chai on Lockhart Road in Hong Kong. That diner has since gone under due to the pandemic. But over blueberry pancakes, Robin was telling me, and another friend of mine, Ed Chin, who's a local compliance sector recruiter, that pretty soon, and he said this to me back in summer of 2018, pretty soon he said, your whole AML compliance game is going to be, you might as well just appoint a data scientist as the head of your AML FCC department, that it's going to be about searching through troves of data and discerning common themes, trends, patterns of interaction, and that in the process, a fair amount of middle management, junior analysts, money laundering reporting officers are going to be let go. And that, it's going to be more about the data scientists. One, I thought to myself, that type of thinking, yes, automation may well lead to redundancies in bloated compliance departments, and certainly after the HSBC decision and a number of the banks being hit with enforcement actions and huge fines, they went on a hiring craze, some of the banks. Automation may lead to redundancies in bloated compliance departments. But again, it gives short shrift to the substantive knowledge to say that AI is going to be a solution to your problems. It gives short shrift to substantive knowledge of financial crime. And two, there is no substitute for on-the-ground experience in conducting investigation. And while I think the data scientists can be part of the interdisciplinary teams that are going to be necessary in the future for financial crime compliance, to say that you don't need any of that seems short-sighted. And again, the thing about algorithms is they work until they don't. One day that Iran sanctions transaction slips through your net, and then that's an awkward conversation to have with regulators, because again, they'll say you were too greedy, you went too far in the direction of cost cutting and automation. Had you had more human beings around, good chance a human analyst might have picked up on that. Yes, red flag, and that they would have caught it. So there are dangers to automating to the nth degree, and I can't help but feel as though, for that reason, a lot of institutions are going to have some degree of built-in redundancy in terms of somewhat more human staff than they need. Yeah, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts.
That's actually a very good point, and I like that you raised it, because what differentiates us humans from the AI? It's the element of this wonderful thing we have called critical thinking. It's this ability to create
context, exactly, context, life experience.
Yes, this critical thinking, inquisitive mind, critical thinking. If the entire AML regime, as it functions today, is based on the red flags and stipulations and making people or the compliance professionals so scared of not adhering to those rules, then you are taking the critical thinking out of their equation. You are effectively turning them into tick-boxing machines who cannot think. And even if they critique the red flag, even if or combination of red flags, the scenarios applied on the customer, even though from the regulatory perspective looks like money laundering, but when applying our critical thinking, it's not, and we know it's not. Those compliance professionals still need to follow the machine kind of style reasoning and file suspicious activity report. There's no critical thinking. If that's what we are going to use as AML regime, then we might as well substitute them all with AI. What's the difference? We are not allowing them to think. There was a study conducted actually by one of my colleagues. He was doing a PhD, and he currently is a lecturer at Northumbria University in Newcastle. And he has put together a case studies that represented money laundering that was convicted, so convicted situation, convicted money laundering, and case studies where the money launderer, supposed money launderer, was not convicted, was proven to be innocent. He gave those studies to experts and novices, people who never had anything to do with detecting money laundering, were not aware of the red flags and stipulations and whatnot. And he asked them to determine which cases were convicted money launderers and which were not. Experts guided their opinions based on the red flags and the stipulations. Novices use critical thinking. Novices slightly outperformed the experts in their accurate detection. Why that's a big problem? Because if that's the case, if anyone off the street who has nothing to do with money laundering, has never read about it, looks at the case and thinks about it from a perspective of a thinking, rational human being in the situation that is occurring, and is able to equally well or better detect money laundering, then all those experts are not experts in anti-money laundering at all, but they are experts in regulatory compliance. And if they are experts in regulatory compliance, and this is driven purely by strictly abiding to the rules, then AI will do equally good. It's not like we're finding money laundering anyhow. So that's a bit of a, challenging curveball I threw in there that I am keen to hear your response on that.
From all the people I've spoken to and all the things I've read on this subject matter, how well you do, how good you are at regulatory compliance, and the score you get, either as an organization or a country or a jurisdiction, has nothing to do with the level of illegal funds sloshing around in your society. I mean, and we've seen countries with decent scores on the compliance front have horrendous levels of money laundering and tax evasion going on that the international community recognizes. And then, this segues into the next question. I mean, the US and UK are amongst the most aggressive on AML enforcement. But if you look at the mutual evaluation, and these are countrywide assessments that are done every 7 years, that was done for the US back in, I think, 2017, America's own report card was not that stellar. And the jurisdiction of Delaware, in terms of facilitating a lot of domestic money laundering, was pointed to. That, I think we've discussed the prevailing hypocrisy that exists in the world of AML and sanctions when it comes to the US and the EU and their own enforcement actions, but their regulatory apparatus is often to further their own geopolitical goals, at least outside of the West. That is the perception that many share. Do you concur, or is the point more subtle than that?
So I have the experiences of
you've seen on both sides, in a sense, right?
Yes, that's exactly it. So I was raised in Eastern Europe, and I was raised on TV that was American TV most of the time, that was telling me how wonderful the land of America is, land of opportunities, and everything is perfectly big. Roads are wide, there's no potholes, and everything is just beautiful. It's a country that got it right.
During the Cold War, they had to maintain the impression that they were better than the other side.
Absolutely.
Post 9/11, that goes out the window, and as Solzhenitsyn even points out, two sides of the long-term conflict learn from each other.
Yes.
So it almost, multiple people, the multiple people said that in a unipolar world, the U.S. was starting to resemble the former Soviet Union in terms of its behavior. But I'm sorry, please continue.
Oh, yes, and I'm glad you've mentioned that. So, yes, I was brought on this TV, on this image, and naturally my desire was then I need to go to the United States to learn from the best what finance is about. So I immigrated to the US for the purpose of studying. And I've learned. I returned to the United Kingdom, and gradually...
Large Polish communities in both nations, I would add.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Chicago and the UK.
Yes.
Yep.
And then I returned to the United Kingdom, and my life started to settle here. I started to grow in knowledge because I was doing, of course, a lot of university studies and progressing professionally. I arrived here when I was just out of college, and started to acquire the knowledge that made me question the values that the West is portraying, that they represent, versus actually what the money flow tells me. It tells me a different story, and I couldn't reconcile that. And therefore, I started questioning the purpose of this regime being set up. Naturally, being an inquisitive mind who just wants to find out how I can help this world to be more just, to be more equal, to help with the poverty, being purpose-driven. And I couldn't reconcile what I was being taught and told by the West with how their money moved. And I started thinking, even as big and as controversial as it might sound, that perhaps the way the West set up this rule of how to play with money called AML regime using the Financial Action Task Force was actually to legitimize their money laundering methods, because if the output of their AML regime or the rules of playing with money is such that banks, the risk, small and medium enterprises, or debunk them, or people who come from ethnic backgrounds, and only are willing to bank and service large Western trustworthy corporations, then who benefits from this? Now, clearly not a small and medium enterprise, even a United Kingdom established small and medium enterprise. Definitely not people with ethnic backgrounds, not people in any other parts of the world who simply are struggling to get access to financial services. And they are it's as if we are telling them Western banks are for large Western corporations, and all of you remaining need to find alternative means of transferring your money and paying for your services and trading. If that's the case, well, then you are pushing everyone to use alternative methods. And when they do use alternative methods, then we tell them off that they are potentially money launderers. And if there are any fintechs that develop solutions that serve these markets, of course, they also don't understand the risks they are going into, but that's another story. But then if they start to be strong enough and have enough customers and process enough transactions, then they are hammered down with regulations, and back to square one we go. So what is this anti-money laundering regime set up for? Clearly, it doesn't, in my view, benefit justice. It doesn't benefit targeting poverty. It doesn't benefit equality. It doesn't benefit financial inclusion. It has the opposite effects. So yes, what the West tells us, now that I see it, versus how their anti-money laundering money play game rules are, versus how the money moves, doesn't align. There's a lot of hypocrisy here.
On that point about hypocrisy and double standards, earlier you spoke about restorative justice, but is it because of how big of a exporter of food and energy and the inputs many countries, fertilizer, the inputs that many countries need to grow their own food, because of how large a player in that space that Russia is, on that basis, are we seeing the limits of how effective sanctions can be against such a player in the international system?
Well, we would have to really have a think about those sanctions. When actually those sanctions were first announced, and obviously the war in Ukraine, had a very profound impact on the village that I came from, which is a little town called Przemysl, which is the one that was on the border where I was raised, that was receiving huge volumes of people running from war. And
is it close to Lviv? Is it close to Lviv?
Yes. I was actually in Lviv many times. And people were running through, obviously, this border, and everyone in that town was impacted. Every single family there took refugees, including my own. And when the sanctions were imposed, and I remember even in family here and friends here, they were very happy that these measures were put in place, and that Putin and his regime is going to face the consequences. And I couldn't just be more critical in at that point, saying that they are going to be grossly ineffective. They're not going to change anything, because people, wouldn't Putin and his regime know what they are going to do? Wouldn't they already understand the rules of money that the West has set up and put measures in place to make sure that they are properly mitigating the possibilities of sanctions and what those sanctions could be? Of course they did. They thought critically. They thought like a, rationally thinking criminal. I'm going to do this action. What is going to be the response that I'm going to receive from the West? And put mitigating measures in place to make sure that they impact me as little as possible. Isn't the Russian economy growing?
So you believe Putin had thought through the contingencies ahead of time?
I'm 100% sure he has. Yes. He understands the rules that were put in place here, the rules of playing with money. Isn't he a lot of money here anyhow, in the UK? He knows those rules. For sure, he has put contingencies in place. Seems to be working because the sanctions are not having any impact. Or the sanctions have been set up in such a way not to have an impact, and they were just only window dressing. Either one or the other, because it's clearly not effective. He's still going on. The war is still going on, and he has no plans of backing down.
In the time we have left, a bit more of a personal question, but I mean, philanthropy is important, and something that you have been involved with for several years now as a volunteer is Coptic orphans. I mean, my knowledge of the Coptic Christians of Egypt is that they are one of the oldest Christian sects, not just in the Middle East, but in the world. And apparently they are descendants of the pharaohs, some people say. What could you describe the work you do for them, and what is your attachment, your affinity to them?
But yes, of course. So I am married to a Coptic Christian. My husband is David Marzouk. So we met in America, and he's obviously a Coptic Orthodox Christian. My family actually have been both Catholic and Orthodox, because in Przemysl you have obviously close to the Ukrainian border, and Ukraine is Orthodox. So my grandpa was Orthodox, and he's Orthodox actually. He's 90 years old, turning soon 90. And I've understood both sides always, so I've decided to move from being Catholic to being Coptic Orthodox. And Coptic Orthodox Church is actually the first church that was established. It's a church established by Saint Mark. The Last Supper happened in his attic. And it is a small minority within in Egypt, because Egypt is obviously mostly Muslim. So the Coptic Christians are a small minority there. The organization is helping to bridge the gap of knowledge and experiences between Coptic and Muslim children. That's one of the programs. For example, they pair girls together that one of them, let's say, struggling from understanding science subjects at school, and the other one is thriving in those science subjects. So they pair the two opposing, two different religions together, and the girls work together on helping each other out, and therefore start to understand they are not much different. They are just girls experiencing typical girl issues that anyone would, and they see value in socializing rather than feeling they have to be separated from each other because they come from different religions. The organization is focused very much on education. It's to bring knowledge to children about their own self-worth. Many girls, for example, in Egypt do not feel any worth. And they feel they have no value, that their only value is to be married off, that they cannot be an educated, self-sufficient individuals contributing to the society. It is also empowering mothers who've lost husbands and therefore are now the only providers to find this entrepreneurial spirit within them and understand the skills and talents they have in order to earn income for their families. And the organization helps them to develop their business models and gives them business loans in order to set up a small businesses that would help them to feed the families. For example, if a mom has great abilities to do to sew, then they help her to set up a business in order to sell those items. It also provides money and educational equipment to children in order so they go to school. And then continue supporting the children as they progress through school. Many of those children are extremely impoverished. Many of these people have no roofs. They might have walls, but they have no roofs. They have no floor. They might not have even clothes to wear that are appropriate to go to school, or the means to even get there. So they support those children with all the means that they need in order to accomplish education, to accomplish their dreams. And the results are fantastic. The children that pass through the educational program are actually scoring in their top levels. They become doctors, engineers, and musicians, and they contribute back to the society. So it's very much focused around education. And I am an academic person that I believe strongly that one of the ways to lift up any nation of the poverty is by enabling them access, obviously, to education, to self-worth, to critical thinking. This way, they will create the value for themselves and for the rest of us. So it's not just an organization that gives money; it's an organization that brings education.
What you're doing is very laudable. It's very ennobling, and I'm glad that there are people that take on such activities, because it's very easy to get caught up in one's own affairs, in one's own profession, in this fast-paced world we live in, and beyond that, the amount of suffering in that region, especially in recent times. Before we go, any words of advice, any guidance, any morsels of wisdom you'd like to impart to our listeners, particularly our students, given that we are affiliated with HKU, that you'd like to leave them with? Because we do have a LLM program in compliance and regulation, which is highly regarded, and a good number of law students and others see a career for themselves in the burgeoning field of compliance. I don't think that's going anywhere, as rules and regulations get layered upon each other year upon year, decade upon decade. Compliance is a growing profession, and as they chart their way into that field, any guidance you could offer?
Well, expanding from obviously Coptic orphans work, just my personal experience also that I had during conducting my PhD studies was I felt as a female very lonely, meaning I felt like I'm the only female that is focused on trade-based money laundering technology in the world, because I couldn't find any female working for regulatory technology providers feeling confident to speak about the use of technology to solve trade-based money laundering challenges. And I don't think that's correct. I don't think there are no women. I just think that they are very they are not confident enough to speak about those matters, and they don't hold the right positions. I mean, I was quite persistent to become a part of the product team, despite being told that I'm not techie enough, I need to go back to school. And I became a part of the product team, and I contributed greatly to it. And I had a fantastic experience in career once I was part of the product team. But many people would simply, or many females would simply not want to bother to go through that the challenge or that pain. And I think this is detrimental towards our abilities to actually detect money laundering or to grow the money laundering knowledge in itself. Because also, if I refer back to the studies of my colleague in Laundering University, he also looked at the angle of female versus male when reviewing those money laundering cases, and observed that females, on average, were far more open to go beyond the red flags and the stipulations as were written and apply more or consider more indicators, more context around the case that was being presented to them. They would still misjudge the case, the experts, the money laundering experts, females. They would still misjudge them because they felt that they had to just judge it according to the rules that they were taught. But they were using more context, and they actually performed better than the males who just strictly followed the rules. The novices, the female novices who didn't obviously know anything about money laundering, performed the best in all of this sample group, again because they used more data. And yet I feel that within the RegTech technology space, there aren't enough females in leading positions to challenge this approach that we currently use to detecting money laundering. They don't feel confident enough. Maybe they don't feel like they have it in them to challenge. But I think that it's one of the tiny little, perhaps percentage way we can move this industry to expand beyond just rudimental thinking. They were far more inclined to doing the decisions that serve justice and well-being than just money. They were not that money driven. So I think we need a proper balance. And right now we don't have this balance in the RegTech industry. And I think that would be probably one way that, as I came from the RegTech industry, an advice to help it to be more critical, to introduce this critical thinking, perhaps just enabling more females to prosper their careers. And yeah, in a kind of a natural summary, we need to do critical thinking and just stop following those red flags. And I do know that obviously following the red flags and complying and praising the regulators and the whole regime is beneficial for your career, because you are going to open lots of doors for yourself if you are one of the sheep that just follows the herd and voices the same opinions. And it's always more difficult if you decide to stand against the crowd. But without people like that, we are not going to move this industry forward. We're just going to be spinning in circles. Criminals going to keep making money. People will be debunked the risk. There's going to be widening wealth gap. Even in the UK, it will be widening wealth gap. I mean, how many SMEs, some small and medium enterprises are being debunked and risked? How many of them are not being offered loans and support? These businesses actually worldwide account for 90% of the workforce. They are the ones who are actually moving the world around. And if we are not making sure that they can prosper and innovate, then the gap is just going to widen. Then what's the purpose of all of the AML regime in this case if it punishes the good guys and rewards the bad?
The issue of the gender imbalance, I think it's true in fintech and IT and the tech world writ large, and that's a recurring theme on our program. I guess there's still room for improvement. There's still work to be done, and perhaps we'll have you on a future episode to talk about why some of those underlying root causes exist, and what can be done to ameliorate them, any possible solutions. But I guess we'll leave it there for now. Mariola Marzouk, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. It was an absolute pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. Until next time.